before we approve the agenda?
Couple things, Coach, if the board would entertain, Jake wants to go over some new procedures in the office that the auditors and the state really want us to have in place. And so the items are in the Google folder. Federal procurement procedures, capitalization, conflict of interest, travel procedures. Again, if he can just go over them tonight and you can consider them, maybe next meeting you can approve them, but the policy team had already talked about it. So, and then the other item is a second executive session to deal with the grievance.
Yes. Actually, we'll propose that we cover 2 items in the executive session, not that we go in and out. Okay.
Thank you.
So any other changes, additions?
The clerk has indicated that we're going to pass on the recognition of outstanding students, having done it yesterday.
That's correct.
It's really hard to hear tonight with the fans.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think we should leave it on because it's so warm, but I don't know how much it's interfering with what you can hear.
So we can
Speak up a little.
Yes, those of us who are wearing hearing aids would appreciate that.
Would you like us to turn it down or?
No,
shut it
no.
off?
I
Okay.
understand about the heat.
All right.
No, I prefer not to hear.
Yeah. For some reason, it's just enough background
Right.
noise that I can't hear a thing.
It does.
The community can hear us perfectly.
Good.
Great. Okay, so may we have a motion?
We approve the agenda as amended.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. So that brings us to communication and support to the board. Section 1 EL Policy 9.
All right. As you would imagine, we are dealing with the closing of school. That's always exciting on campus. Lots of stuff going on, lots of trips all over the place, class trips and student trips to trampoline parks and everywhere else you can imagine. But things seem to be closing up well. We have a couple of Juneteenth celebrations because we're not going to be in school Monday the 19th, but some folks are doing some things tomorrow, and I will be sending out a message to families about what Juneteenth is and a little bit of information and some information for them to look up on the web, different websites. So that should be helpful. Roy or Julie, do you have anything to add to that? And if not, that's all right.
Just that the tech center, I know, connected with the Vermont Student Anti-Racism Network this week to have a student come and speak at the tech center as part of their Juneteenth celebration. They did that yesterday. So just some great community connections going on around that. And I know Hartford is doing celebrations tomorrow and some really partnering up with older and younger students to do some learning together. So some really great things happening around that in our schools. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so that, moving right along, under governance process, we have a fairly long list, but I think we'll be moving through it fairly expeditiously. So we'll start with the HACTC, fund balance, and best run report.
Jake's going to handle the next several items, so I'm just going to let him run through it.
Tonight's one of my favorite meetings because it's another time that I asked you for a couple of approvals. I'll try and be as brief as I can because I know we got a lot to get to tonight. So as Coach said, the HACTC fund balance and the best room came in at a price of about 1.3 million. As it stands now, we've got about 978,000 to go towards the best room, which is why I'm looking at the fund balance for what we're projecting for this year. Because the previous 2 fiscal years, we've been able to basically set aside this fund balance to go towards the best room, where in other years, we would have had to give that money back. But because we've, our board has approved it, their board has approved it, we're working together to fund this thing. We're pretty excited about it. So I would like to recommend that our board allocate up to 450,000 to go towards funding the best room project.
I would move that we do just that.
I will second it.
Discussion?
We've been intending to do this for a very, very long time. We've had to delay due to circumstances beyond our control, an epidemic or two, things like that. But I think it's time to get it done.
And I think between the building committee and the work of the board around being as careful in our oversight as possible, have gone through the right steps to get us there. It puts the district and community in a very good space, because that room will be invaluable to the district. Okay,
Call the question.
all in favor of approval of the use of the fund balance for the best room, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So moved.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next item that I have for you is the internal finance controls checklist for schools that we are required to do under 16 VSA 242A. This is something that we always do every year. It's in your packet for this evening, so if there's any questions, please let me know. I'll keep it brief because not much has really changed, but the one thing I always like to point out is our checks written to a specified payee and not to cash. And I said, no, the only instance we have that is for petty cash, because Mascoma has said that the checks need to be made out to cash, not petty cash and the school. So that is the only instance in which checks are made out to cash. Are there any questions on the checklist?
Absolutely. The second one from the bottom. Have you experienced a theft or embezzlement during the last 5 years? Why did we answer yes to that one?
We had an incident with athletics last January 22, where one of the custodians had gotten into the athletic funds, specifically the gate receipts. So that's why we had a theft there. Took appropriate action, responded immediately, changed the procedures, got things in place.
Okay, I mean, and I'm guessing in relative terms, it wasn't material to the district.
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Great question, Russ.
I'd like to move that we accept the checklist and the report complied by.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So moved.
I just did a volunteer sign off on this.
He will sign.
Well, it's only appropriate that our finance committee chair will.
Or if anything goes wrong, the fact he will no longer be in the board makes it, I'll let you be.
Whoa.
Who's this Russ North guy?
You know, we almost like you need the drum.
The next item I have for you is the FY24 food service contract.
Mhm.
As part of the regulations, my school board is required to approve the new contract, which we have to do every year. So So that's included in your packet this evening. We're looking at a 4% increase with the total estimated contract value of $632,738.33. Any questions about the renewal for next year?
Just with the universal meals bill passing today or being signed, well, the governor didn't sign it, he let it pass. What effect does that have? Or do we know?
Not really much of an impact because regardless of the meal prices, we're picking up a certain, a couple cents on every breakfast and every lunch. So
Okay.
it doesn't really break the bank. It all depends on, what the actual reimbursement rates are for what the state has set.
Move that we accept the new food service management contract for its renewal.
So we have a second?
I'll second. Sorry, Nancy, you can second everything tonight.
I don't know about that end of the table. We're gonna have to get a little riley over it. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. And you wanted to share with us some work you've been doing in the
Yes.
office?
So my assistant business manager and I get together every Wednesday and do policy and procedures Wednesday, which is basically getting everything that we do now into writing because it doesn't help to have everything up in the ether and not in paper. So we've been working on actually documenting what we do, how we do it. The three that I want to kind of share with you tonight are the prevention of conflict of interest in procurement, the capitalization of assets, federal procurement procedures, and the travel procedure. These were all documents that were basically drafted by VASBO, which is the Vermont Association of School Business Officials. This all has to do with all the federal grant stuff that we need to have in place. These four in particular, we need to have approved by our board. It's more of a compliance checkbox than anything else. So VASBO was nice enough to give us basically the templates for everything, and Kimberly and I have basically taken everything and made it ours. So we have some pretty good drafts of some documents for you to look over.
And those are in the packet?
They are not in the packet. They are in the folder online.
Okay.
So
I'll make sure, that I'll send them all to you in an email so you have everything clear.
Okay.
Jacob, I have in the capitalization, is that the other one?
that's one there.
So we will endeavor to review them, and at the next meeting, whenever it occurs, we'll.
Right now it's scheduled for the 28th, so I'll make sure you have them all in an email. Roy can show them tonight, but it's probably too much for you to, consider
Just a
that.
public season.
Yeah.
When do you need board approval, Jacob?
What's that?
When do you need the board's approval?
Just whenever we get to it. It's been on my list to get this done and board approved. There's nothing really holding it up.
So the threshold's $5,000.
Policy.
What's that?
The threshold for capitalization is $5,000.
And this is something that we have our auditors do because my staff certainly don't have time to do this. So we actually pay our HR staff to do it. We supply them all the invoices. They crunch all the numbers and tell us all the journal adjustments to make for this stuff.
Cool.
And for what it's worth, I had, together with Tom, reviewed this.
Since it is a policy component, it would only make sense that our policy committee, would have that. And then the board as a whole will have an opportunity before the end of the month to do its, review. We'll be ready for it.
Sorry about that. I'll make sure you all have them plenty of time for the next meeting. If you're comfortable approving them, or if you'd rather wait, then it'll be the pleasure of the board.
I know we're just reading it tonight, but I'm a geek. On the procurement policy, is there a section on sole source justification?
Yes.
Very specific bullet you want me to go to, Jacob?
I mean, we don't have to get into detail. I mean, Jacob says there is.
Okay.
But that's probably the most important part of this policy.
Right.
The federal procurement's a huge part of what we do, and making sure that we're compliant with all the regulations and everything else. We have so much federal funds.
Right.
Yeah, but
Especially-
they're particularly sensitive on sole source items.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's always something where, if it really is one, I always try and consult with the AOE and say, hey, here's the situation, what's the best practice here, I'm trying to follow that.
In a previous life, we had a situation where it was a mask mounted gun sight. So there was only one. So
Yeah, that's the thing, certain pieces of equipment sometimes, especially analytical equipment, can be that way.
So yeah, as long as we have it and follow it, that's key.
So
My comment on this is even though I trust Jacob completely and I trust our policy committee completely, I would be very uncomfortable to approve it before I've had a
Oh, yeah.
chance to really look at it.
No, we're not gonna.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay,
we're intending to announce it.
okay,
You'll
good.
get to look at it and be sent out. We just made.
Okay, super, thank you.
Ask general questions.
This would be considered, if it was a standard policy, this would be the first reading.
Okay,
So, we do have those first reads on all of our, policies, so we consider this that.
And the matter of fact, Tom and I had a conversation. Do we even bring these to the board or not? Normally, internal policies for the running of the school, procedural stuff, not policies, but procedures aren't brought to the board for review. They're just, these are the rules how we're gonna run our office. These are the rules how we're gonna, whatever it is, respond to fire alarms
Right.
or clean the hallways. And those are not generally issues that arise to, but because these are actions with a compliance thing, they said, yeah, let's bring it.
Error on the side.
Cool.
that's it? Woohoo. Okay, thank you, Jacob.
Thanks, Jacob.
You're free.
All right,
Bless you.
bless you. That brings us to the ends report.
That's me.
That is in your packet.
Yep.
And it's large rather than small like
Thank
last
you.
time.
Much appreciated.
Not to say the board members are older.
Right.
No, I'm old. I'm not saying anything about all of you.
So for this report, we're going to focus on the health and well-being. And just as a reminder to the community, what health and well-being represents is that it's around students who will develop personal and social skills and behaviors that will support the physical, emotional, and mental well-being. Students will demonstrate an understanding for how nutrition, exercise, and athletics, creative outlets, self-reflection, and personal relationships contribute to a healthy, well-adjusted, and productive person. Within that, there's targets for the district. The focus of tonight is to utilize Panorama, which is our social emotional well-being survey. If you remember, we reviewed that results almost a calendar year ago. So for tonight, I did so that you folks have access to grades 3 and 2 through 5 results. For tonight, I'm going to focus on the 6 through 12. Very similar to how Julie kind of gave an overarching around academic excellence, but then focused on the K-5 realm. So we're following the same model. But the nice thing, if you just look at a overarching view of our elementary schools, kids are scoring themselves in a very positive light and showing up definitely in the higher ends, with really only one dot showing up in the in that red orange area of the behavioral focus, and that's around school climate. For grades 6 through 12, very similar. The scores were extremely high. Supportive relationships is really where I'm going to focus. We talked about having an area where we're going to celebrate, and then an area that we want to focus on working on. The supportive relationships is really where I want to celebrate. And we'll talk about that in terms of high school specific and middle school specific as we move forward. In terms of where we want to focus, you can see I had some choices. School climate, sense of belonging, and engagement were 3 areas. It was like, okay, where do I want to focus my energies? Engagement is where I chose to meet with the principals and talk about where we're at with that. Peter, did you start having a hand up?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Could you give an explanation of what is meant by school climate in these surveys? Because when I looked at slide 5, which was for the 3rd and 5th graders, the teacher-student relationship, school safety, sense of belonging, engagement, which I would have felt almost are like the elements that make up school climate, were all very high, but school climate isn't. Now, for the 6th to 12th grade, it makes a little more sense that school climate, sense of belonging and engagement, if it's going to be low, but at least be low together. And I'm trying to understand how that dichotomy of great, I love it here, except for the school.
And that was actually one of the things I want to focus on, because Nelson and I really tried to tease this out.
Yeah.
And it is how each child must have read the questions differently, because he and I were in the same boat. If you have that one trusted adult in the building, and this advisory is creating that system, and that's scoring really high, one would think I have a high sense of belonging in the building. But 2 questions that to him and I really we couldn't tease out how it would be different, still scored differently for the children. So you're spot on.
The
I have-
types of questions, oh, I was just gonna say.
Yeah, we have, I have a couple of specific questions. So around supported relationships, the one that, so for example, do you have a teacher or other adult from school who you can count on to help you no matter what? Score extremely well. And then have it right here. That's challenging feelings. I apologize. 1 second. I do have it in. Okay. Here's the one that's it's a small tease out, but how well do people at your school understand you as a person? So yes, I have a strong relationship with an adult. To me, that means that person needs to understand me as a person. I think the kids read this as not one adult. It's, does the community understand me as a person? And that's how, to answer your question, how they start to, two things that sound very similar start to tease their way further and further apart.
So
Yeah, I would argue that they're not similar because due to the school climate, they need that supportive teacher or adult. Because if they're not feeling comfortable in school, then that would be highlight why it's good that we scored well there. I am very concerned that we don't score well at school climate. And I mean, I've heard various rumors. And I think that's something, understanding we can only focus on one thing. But I think going forward, it would be good to know, maybe flesh out from students and questions why they don't. And if it needs to be verbiage or something changed, because we don't know why, it's hard to attack.
And your statement about the kids interpreting the question one way and we as adults interpreting a completely different way also makes how we interpret all of their answers, because they are thinking still as children, even in high school, and we're thinking as adults. And I think that this is the one thing that I really like having the surveys done with the kids, because it does bring a lot of things to us that we would not maybe normally find out about or hear about. But I do have grave concerns about how are these kids interpreting these questions? What does that mean to them?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's one of the problems with any test.
Yeah.
So it's something I think we've got to delve into a little bit, because I heard an example today at the middle school where a student said that they didn't feel like they belonged to the school. And in reality, when the administration questioned him, it was that I don't belong to the school community, I belong to my family. So there was like a semantic sort of, and I don't know how to navigate that, but I found that interesting, is that some kids read it quite literally and go, no, I don't belong to the school, I belong to my family at home. So.
And as I go through this, Russ, I think that to answer your question, when we started to attack engagement, at least around the high school, is the high school saying we have exhausted flexible pathways as a means to improving engagement. Our next step is actually to work through school climate as a way to approach engagement. So it's funny that you brought that specific example up. That's going to be part of how they want to focus some energies.
Yeah, because I would think improvement in engagement is going to result in improvement in the other two categories, at least logical. Because I mean, if I'm engaged, then I'm feeling more comfortable in the school climate, and I have more of a sense of belonging.
I have one more.
Yeah, totally.
One more just quick thing too, is that it's a great reason why when we look at data, sorry.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hard to hear you.
Sorry about that. When we look at data, we dig deeper and we don't just take, one set of numbers at face value, but we do, talk to the students and look at multiple data sources to really understand what it is that we're looking at, what it means. And one of the things I could just say about elementary, for example, that one school climate area that was lower than the others, when you dig into the questions, what it comes down to is one question. And the question is, at your school, how much does the behavior of other students hurt or help your learning? And that's sort of a tricky question for elementary students, because does the behavior hurt or help is an interesting thing for them to think about. But what's even more interesting about what they answered is they answered neutrally. It doesn't really help or hurt. And so it looks like a negative sort of response to that question, but it's sort of a neutral response. So just, and that would be interesting to dig further into with students specifically, but it's just, again, just kind of digging in a little deeper to the questions, to the, and how, why we disaggregate data too when we look at these questions. Who's answering that way? You know, who are the students that are answering positively, negatively, or neutrally? So just, again, you know, just looking at the multiple aspects of those questions.
And I would suspect COVID has had a big,
Yeah,
big.
for sure.
Absolutely.
Do we have any of this kind of data from pre-COVID?
We started the survey as a
I didn't
result.
think so, but,
We started it right in the middle of
Right.
COVID or the
yeah,
beginning.
so, and I know this demographic has suffered from the sense of belonging to the 2
Right.
years they were sitting in
Right.
front of the screen.
Oh, yeah.
So so we know where we're gonna be focusing. So why?
What's that?
We know where we are going to be focusing
Yep.
and why.
Yep, so broken out specifically, that was 612. So if you look at the high school, the challenging feelings, emotional regulation, self-management, supportive relationships, like I said, the one that I was highlighting, that's the celebration, is the supportive relationships. Scoring 89% at the high school level. And if you look at, much to what you were just talking about, Peter, is what types of questions provide that response, is do you have a teacher or other adult from school who you can count on to help you no matter what? 85% answer that favorably. Do you have a teacher or other adult from school who you need completely yourself around? Once again, 81% scoring that way. What I would want to put out here is this was not the case in a previous iteration of the high school. If you folks remember when the NEAS report came out, we did not score well here. And one of the real action steps that the high school committed to was an advisory program, and more specifically, an advisory program that was targeting one goal. Does every child in this building have an adult that they can connect with? So the reason I want to do this is this hasn't always been the case. This was data that targeted a specific concern, and a targeted action step that they focused on completely with a positive outcome. So that just, it's the step that I think what Julie said is break your data down, but then commit to something very small and discrete that you can focus on, and then you can measure, did it actually do what you asked it to do, as opposed to, there's times that we do something, but it's really hard to target, is that why this number got better? Whereas there's no questioning here. It was one thing they were going to do, and these two questions actually asked, did we do it? So it's a chance to highlight, in some cases, the high school has struggled using data. I think this is a great case of where they did very well.
We're not going to be happy until that's 100%, but this is good progress.
High school results where we have something to highlight: engagement, 30%, and significantly lower than climate. So that's where I wanted to focus, was for several reasons. I think you all brought up COVID. How has the level of online learning impacted the ability to engage in the classroom now? Having taught a class this year, it gave me some insight into how classroom behaviors have changed in academic, the way I attack the academic classroom, things that you may take for granted are just different. That's why I wanted to look at this. And like I said, Nelson and I had some real interesting conversations around this, because it wasn't necessarily what I was thinking he was going to say. And he's really saying, I think we've done everything in our power in terms of changing curriculum, giving choice, giving autonomy. That's not going to be what impacts the engagement. It's going to be through the climate. We'll talk a little bit later how he's going to attack the climate, because he gives us the next steps. But what I would want to say is I did break down this data as how excited are you about going to your class? This gets progressively higher as the students get older. So having taught in high school for a long time, that didn't shock me at all because your ninth grade has a tendency to be a very set schedule with less student choice and the ability to say, how do I want to manipulate my learning? Every year, the high school does a better job of saying you have more choice in that year. But ninth and most of 10th grade is a lot of core subjects, so that 11 and 12, the chances for internships, dual enrollment. Do you want to try dark class? Do you want to, this is where, do you want to go to the tech center? All those things, you ensure your core sections are done so that you can take part in all these choices at 11th grade. It didn't surprise me that score's a little lower. And then the last one, how interested are you in the class? 41%. It's still not where we want to be. This was a little more consistent from grade to grade, which I found interesting. That it didn't improve as they were getting older. 9, 10, and 11 were pretty straightforward. Just not going to take them interested in my class to a certain extent. But 12th grade, there's a spike. So although the 9 through 11 is stagnant and not where we want it, we're keeping them in the game, and we are getting them into classes that do pique their interest. Just for some, it takes till 12th grade to get them. Next steps, continue what we're doing around flexible offerings is critical. I think that having a child, doing as a child there, we see how that impacts them on a daily basis for their ability to access what they want. But more specifically now is Nelson was saying how they documented all of the activities that used to just be part of who we are that disappeared due to COVID. So for example, all school celebrations, things that bring the community together, they're going to start bringing back next year. They've been in a 3-year break from them. They're looking at how do we start getting the community as a whole back together. So next year when you ask questions around this data, I think that the questions will be how did the community celebrations impact these numbers?
See, I think part of the difficulty is being really clear about the definition of community.
Okay.
And your, let's say, cohort group is one community.
Mm-hmm.
If you're into athletics, that's another community. So and then there's these, they all kind of intersect together, and there's convergences, but because and that, I guess that gets back to that whole idea of how we ask the question and how direct is the question and why we're seeing variations in the response, because every student's impacted a little differently, in all of those spheres, but it's all part of the experience. I think even looking back, we try to go into the Wayback Machine and go, okay, sports kind of help in the academics, but I had one teacher that really helped me get through, and a couple others not so much. I mean, whatever that piece is, but that's part of that, what's going on.
I think the other thing about school climate, and I'm going to go against what's popular, is I think there's a problem about making the kids understand they're there to learn and supporting teachers when a member of the class is being disruptive. Again, rumor, but I've heard from several sources that that's not happening. In other words, students are allowed to leave class go to I forget what it's called, the old I, and spend significant time there outside their class. The other thing is looking at computer use, because students are using their computer for non-classroom activities, and there are teachers who feel there's nothing they can do about that. In other words, they'll close the computer, the kid will reopen it, and they don't feel the support to take a consequence. I guess that's one of the things, and I know that's contrary to current thought, but I think COVID has thrown out some of what the current thought might have been. Again, it's a balancing act, and I don't know where it is, but if students are allowed to do this, it's a little bit, and I look at Nancy and she's doing it, and I'm going, then why am I bothered?
You know, at the VSBA meeting today, we were talking a little bit about kids and this kind of subject. And one of the things that was brought up by more than one of us was the fact that, oh my God, can you believe it? The kids are calling the teachers by their first names in class, down the hall, and having not inappropriate, but a little bit not healthy relationships and talking with the teachers and some of the, so it's not just, but I'm saying in the state of Vermont, that's what's going on right now. And I know that many of our teachers are called by their first name. And so we were talking about, well, now is that a lack of respect for the teacher? Or is that just now, this day and age, that's okay to do?
I see the wrong person to ask. I've been introducing myself as Roy to kids since
Well,
1997.
see, that's it. Yeah, that's
So-
what I'm saying. Oh, I'm just throwing that out there. I just.
So I think that, with names or with anything, respect is
Earned.
a relationship. And do you have a relationship with children? If you
Mhm.
have a relationship with children, respect goes both ways.
Yes.
You won't have to ask, if you did a classroom visit, you won't ask, regardless of name use, is there respect in the room? It's immediate and it's apparent.
Yeah,
I just thought I would throw that out there because I just thought it was interesting because it developed
it
into
is.
quite a
Well,
conversation
it's a
today.
great conversation because where's the focal? Where's the focal point?
Mhm.
And it is nuanced because I was calling teachers by their first name 40 years ago at Hanover. So it's again, depends on the relationship. And I think that's another place possibly where COVID comes in, because some of these students didn't really develop a relationship with teachers
Right.
over 2 years. Because I know in my high school, after I had somebody for 3 or 4 years, for good, for bad, we both knew each other type of thing. And it held interest, respect, and all that other kind of stuff.
Sorry, that was
No,
maybe a
I
little
mean,
off,
it's,
but it was
no,
just,
no, it's a valid question, and I think it all revolves around the fact that students may not really understand
Mhm.
the dynamic and how it's supposed to work.
See, that's part of, let's say, the process. When you think of, a classroom environment and the tone that you choose to set, like in your classroom, and the expectations that you set. If they're clear, direct, and respectful, 98 to 99% of the kids get it. There's always going to be some outliers,
Mhm.
but that's human nature. But if those, it's just like when we have our conversations and say, these are the group norms. I mean, we have to set those. Otherwise, people are all over the place, and you don't get to do the work or achieve the goals that we're trying to achieve during that engagement, whatever it might be. And so that, those are And they vary, from educator to educator. But yet, the consistent piece is the practice. And tell, regardless of, just like you said, if you called your teacher by the first name, it was always from a point of respect versus because it was okay. And there were expectations within that environment, and you knew what they were.
Exactly. I mean, it's a little bit like in the military, calling somebody Mr. isn't necessarily a sign of respect.
It's true.
So it's fascinating.
Yeah, if I can
Sorry.
just add, I'm just so appreciative that we're having this conversation, that we have data to talk about. And, no one's denying that we don't have room, to grow. So, we want to keep looking at the data and making sure that we're moving the bar up and moving forward. So thankfully, we started this process a few years ago, and we can, we continue to use it to have these conversations and say, are we improving? Are we getting better? There's no doubt in my mind that we had some, regression during the pandemic at all levels, both in learning and in behavior. Things like Russ talked about with the technology. There are a lot of issues in school. And they're really having a huge impact. That's why we're having more trouble finding teachers, recruiting teachers, more behavior issues, less, more students that aren't engaged. But, we have a tool that we're going to use to monitor where we're at and making sure that we're analyzing the data and getting better. And when we don't, we implement more, programs or use more resources to make sure we're improving. But yeah, it's an interesting time in schools.
Oh, yeah.
And I think, without trying to rationalize our data, all of my colleagues, when we sit down, we talk about the same things.
Yeah.
Behavior. That regression. Are we seeing growth? How are we going to pull kids out and move forward? And I think we are. I'm very hopeful that we are. It's just,
my
it's been hard.
observation, looking around the rest of the state, is I get a chance to do that, just like, you did, too. And you get a chance to talk to a lot of different school board members and chairs especially. And it's fascinating to me, like you said, with your colleagues, having the same discussion. And how do we, as an educational community, provide the supports we can for those students to do that growth that they need to do. Because I'll tell you, when those young people come, like even into an environment like here, to get their awards or to listen to Molly talk last night, you just go, wow, that is cool, I mean, so you can see the impact, and we want that to be greater, obviously, and have more kids feel that same experience. And I think that's our collective goal, as members of this community. And when I think of our community, it's all of it. The board, the administration, the kids, the parents, that's what this is all about. So it's kind of cool.
Well, with any data, there's things to celebrate.
Yeah.
And feel good about, and there's things to go, wow, we got to work on that.
And I think it's also important to realize it's a relatively small sample size, and different students put a different level of commitment into answering. So it's going to be the trend that is going to be important. And 1 year snapshot is obviously things to work on, but not necessarily reflective that the world is coming to an end type thing. We have to keep it in perspective.
I would say the another note to celebrate in terms of commitment at the district level. Highest participation, the winter and the data that we're about to get for the spring are the highest numbers in terms of participation rate. All the administrators are truly committed to all the students representing the same. So,
Yeah.
as we looked, there could be some shifts in some of these numbers because when 175 out of 500 answer versus 495 out of 500, you've got some
Exactly.
people who maybe didn't use it's. I don't discount it's not unlike the SATs. Our SAT scores would look like they're getting worse over time, but it wasn't. It was that we went from a small cohort taking part in the SATs to the
Everybody.
entire
Right,
school
Every.
Right.
having access to the SATs. So in that window, you would say, what did Hartford do wrong? It's like, no, what did Hartford do right? And now let's look at these numbers, how we work with them.
The other thing too, sorry, right,
No, please.
was just that, as Roy was saying, this is data that's collected 3 times a year. So not only are we looking at these one-time snapshots, but we're looking at how it changes over the course of a year. And then not even just that, but how does it change over years? So, and that administrators are able to look at certain, patterns in the data and say, gosh, it looks like, there's some dips in the spring, every spring. What does that mean about our students? What do we need to change about our programming in order to sort of understand that students might be coming to the spring and there's tons of testing going on. Students are maybe feeling anxious about the end of the school year. So what do we do in order to help, recognize those patterns and put things in place that are going to help support our students in those different points of the year. So I think just looking at it in that sense. The other thing, just to say really quickly, that's been really neat that some schools have been doing is engaging students in looking at the data. And that's been really cool to hear about, what they're doing, saying like, hey, look at what we found. What do you think the reason is for this? What do we need to know about your responses in order to, understand that better? And so there's some really, again, there's lots of different ways of engaging with data sources like this and not just, looking at it in one lens, but looking at it across many different ways.
We've gone way over for the time. But
Sorry.
There is more in here. There's a whole middle school section, but you all have access to it. It's very similar in terms of what they're doing. But what I would tell you is, just so you know, that the middle school is really looking at the data beyond just a small leadership team. They're expanding it to their whole staff and really focusing on their goals. And one of them has been throughout COVID around that social well-being. So they've worked as a collective whole, and then specifically they're partnering with their instructional coaches around what are some practices to change in the classroom to impact this. So as you all look at, I think Russ was the one that highlighted, hey, let's start talking about how my data meets my investment. The district has made a commitment and an investment in coaches. So there's an example where the numbers are there and they're using it for that. So as we start to really push for folks to say investment and where is that happening, this is an example.
Yeah, exactly.
And then being responsive to change, because as you move forward and those investments prove positive, it gives you direction as to, so now we can reallocate and look at how do we help those less engaged areas, and it's more descriptive. And that's the fascinating piece about this in this whole spring thing, is it is Vermont, and winter affects kids differently, right? I mean, if you're an outdoorsy, skier, snowshoer, type of individual, you're fine. But if you're more reclusive and you come out of it, I think we've all seen that with just from, our own children, from children, child to child.
The only last thing I would just say, only because I got to say coaches here, there are coaches, KA, Julia has really taken the leadership role with them this year. They worked with Coaching for Equity as a text to base a lot of their work on. And I saw a real change in the group dynamic. It felt like you made some massive progress.
Since you brought it up, our coaches are phenomenal. I just, and I am grateful every day for them and the work that they do.
So there's your ends. I think that those are the key points for you folks to hear about. But I think that what we saw tonight and what we saw in Julie's presentation is keep these small for next year with a couple of finite pieces of data that we can focus on, because the conversation is pretty rich, as opposed to, I like the move as opposed to somebody saying, here's all of my data, I overwhelm you, we can't really dig in on something very specific. So I appreciated being able to present it like this, as opposed to trying to say, here's a huge story I need to try and explain to you.
Absolutely, because, and I think the next step is then when it comes budget season, to then discuss the action and the fact that these actions may add to the budget, but we think there will be a payoff and we will be able to come back to the people and say, I mean, we hope it's going to be successful, but there's no guarantee, but at least there's some criteria there and we're holding ourselves to a certain level of accountability.
And just not to belabor it, much more, but as Roy and you said, to us, it tells the story. The fact that our educational team came forward and said, we're going to ask your support to support us in developing that coaching model. And, we as a board said, it's for the kids. Let's see what happens. Well, now we've had a chance to see, and now we have a chance to share, like you said, Russ, with the community. This is the result, of that investment. And we feel very strongly, based on those results, that if we continue to work in those directions, it's a good investment in our kids.
And as long as we continue to communicate with the public, because from a public relations point of view, if the district was given a grade, I'd give us a D-.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we had Panorama 5 years ago, 6 years ago, the data, I believe, would have shown that that connection with the adults was much lower than it is now. There was a lack of interest in the courses we were offering. It was sort of one size fits all. That's how we started moving, again, before the data, but we started moving towards the Independent Learning Center and, all the different courses that we offer for kids now, basically whatever they're interested in. And that's made a huge difference in that engagement piece. And now we realize we have to do more, where Roy's talking about climate, because we see, another concern across the whole school that's a little different. So we can now use the data to say, okay, so what are we going to try to improve climate? And then what data do we have to tell us whether we are or we're not? So I think we're getting better. I'm not trying to, explain away any sort of deficit or weakness, but I think we're getting more accurate in how we're trying to implement and use resources to make change, and then keep data to say, are we or are we not? Because we can't make up the data.
Right.
The data is the data, we're more than willing to confront it and go, first of all, is it telling us what we need to know? And, what is it telling us? So
See, back to what Russ just said though about our grade, our communication grade. That's the part that, we're hearing things, as your board community that excite the heck out of me. The fact that we're not getting that level of information to you as the public is distressing, because if you knew what we hear, our grade would go up a little bit too. I'm not saying we get it, let me hear it, but they go up a little bit.
I was gonna say, there's only one way to go. And I think the other thing in that, and I don't want to take too much time, is the bad things, perceived or real, get out more readily than the good things. Because like parents will complain about a particular issue and I'll gossip with Nancy. I won't necessarily say, oh, wow, this is going on. So I think that's the other part of why the communication is so important, to help balance, so people make an informed decision. They recognize there's a lot good in Hartford, but there's some areas we need to improve on.
Of course.
And the last thing I would say about school climate is don't discount. Maggie started some great work. Unfortunately, end of February, Julia is going to pick up that work. And the more work we do in the areas of equity, the more climate will improve. So it's the part of the work that Julia is going to do for in terms of helping all the schools move forward. So I just want to lose track of that.
I'm gonna brag one more time about our instructional coaches, because I can't help it. But just in terms of sharing out their work to the community, I have been asked 3 times now at the state level to share some of the work that that they are doing, not me, the coaches, because it is so impactful to their school communities. So I would always love to share that with you, because it is 3 times I've been approached to say, like, we've recognized the improvement cycles and science that your coaches are doing in your buildings. We'd like to hear more about that. That is them. That is 100% the phenomenal work that they're doing and the value that they're bringing. So just in terms of thinking ahead.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Probably would be a good engagement topic sometime next year, is just to talk about our coaching model.
Yeah.
And how it works.
Mhm.
And it's part of why I'm so supportive of having the 2 directors, because they need to really support that work of the coaches. The coaches are the ones on the front line doing the work with the teachers who are making the differences with kids every single day. So it's that curriculum work, it's that social, emotional, behavioral work, it's the equity work. I mean, it's really powerful. And I think it's having great benefit for us.
It's sharing the load. Not too many things can be said.
Yeah.
So
Well,
thank you so much for.
Yes.
So that brings us to calendar discussions and changes.
Yeah, the calendar suggestions came from negotiations this year. And in the teacher negotiations, we had a lot of discussion about trying to solve the discrepancies and in the needs of elementary, really pre-K 8 staff with 9 through 12. There's always been a bit of a rub with our calendar between the elementary schools, the middle school, and the high school. They have different needs, but we've always sort of been like, nope, one size fits all, one district, sorry, deal with it. This is how it's going to go. And in negotiations this year, and in some of the other discussions I've had outside of negotiations with the union and administrators, it's like, why do we continue to do that, one size fits all with the calendar? So Julie and I had a conversation recently with the union administration, I guess you'll call it, the union executive board. And it was really a representative from the elementary, middle, and the high school around the calendar. And I think in this chart, it's a little hard because there's a lot of words in this chart, but basically we've come up with a way to resolve that one size fits all, that discrepancy between the elementary and the middle school and the high school needs. But it requires a little bit of innovative thinking around the calendar. Basically having the elementary school, the elementary schools and the middle school start a day later than the high school in the fall, if you will. It's really not fall, late August. And then allowing the high school to have their 2 days in January when they switch semesters. The elementary and the middle school never needed that, but we just did it because that was the high school, what they needed to go from closing out first semester, doing their grades, changing up their documents and their grade books and their class plans for the new semester, which is like a whole new year, a whole new set of courses, possibly. The elementary schools and the middle school don't need that change. And then what the elementary schools do need and the middle school is more professional development time throughout the year that the high school has already built into their day. So that's what this shows. And I can go through the specific changes to the calendar if you want, or the real impact to the community around the early release days.
If I may, part of what came out during the negotiations of the teachers' contract this time was an emphasis on the distinct lack of understanding and appreciation for the fact that just as the students at different ages are in different developmental places, so the curriculum at different ages is in different places and different methodologies. And therefore the teachers had different needs depending on which age the student, what class, what developmental stage the students were in. And there was a very earnest plea that we attempt to address this. During the negotiations, we were not willing to promise what the proposed response would be, but we did promise, and I'm glad to see we are keeping that promise, that we would take this information very seriously and that we would look for ways to address the different needs of the teachers of different populations. And having had a chance to quickly scan through this, I think that while this is not a cure-all, it is in fact a genuine attempt to address those needs. And I'm therefore supporting this.
I have a question. So who came up with this? Did the teachers or the teachers?
Yeah.
Okay, that's, I
This
just
was
didn't know.
presented by the executive board of the union based on their feedback from the teachers. So what
Okay.
was nice was, in years past, there's always been some friction there between the
Right.
needs of the secondary teachers and the needs of the elementary teachers. This time they presented this together. They had already worked out all the tough spots, and they just presented to Julie and I around like basically exactly this. And it makes a lot of sense to me.
Does me too.
It's different in that you have, pre-K 6 starting a day later than 6 through 12. It's different in that at the mid-semester break, elementary teachers and middle school teachers will work one of those 2 days, whereas the high school teachers will have the 2 days. So the elementary teachers will just have one, the high school teachers will have two there. But we separated the buses a few years ago, which made this sort of thing all possible. They're no
Sure.
longer connected. So it's easy as far as transportation, which has always been sort of a stumbling block.
Yeah.
And what else is nice, it's always been like, well, if somebody has an early release, everybody has to have an early release. Well, this gets us away from that. This makes, pre-K through 8 have early releases on those 5 designated days, where the high school doesn't need that. They have their professional development time built into their
Right.
schedule. So those were the big differences that we were trying to sort out. And I'm pretty happy that they did it on their own and they came out with a very balanced sort of proposal. I don't know, Julie, if you want to add anything. You were in that conversation, but it was.
No, I just think what I would add is that one of the things that we really support and the teachers have been asking for is because they're engaging more deeply with curriculum and practice, that requires more time and collaboration. And that's one of the, the rationales for more time for them to be, together, being able to do that, to really enrich their practice, which allows them to better meet the needs of more students. And so, this is for students, for improving instructional practice, understanding and deepening of curriculum, and better outcomes for students. So.
And that was clearly identified from the last couple of rounds of negotiations. That's the other piece. And so the fact that we're finally getting to this point, is it's a positive measure.
Right.
Now, the fact is that the teachers in the high school are much more in the process of passing on knowledge and subject matter information and so forth, and are much less in the position of being a supervisor of the behavior of the children and a person who is responsible for basically acting as your daily lifeguard, making sure that you don't somehow destroy yourself with the other child who doesn't know what to do. The teachers in the elementary schools are on. They're never off.
That's right.
The entire day. They do not get a period in which, okay, this is my off period. I'm not teaching a class for this block of time. I can therefore focus on my development or get organized or deal with or reflect upon all of those things that are necessary to be a good teacher, and are just as necessary for an elementary teacher as they are for a high school teacher. But you can't build that kind of time easily into the day of an elementary school teacher, because they do have to make sure that someone didn't mention third-year-old, third grader is not figuring out a new way to commit suicide.
Exactly.
And given the extra time for early release, gives the teachers a chance to engage in that kind of thing. So I think it makes sense.
One of
I
the
think it
things
does
that
too.
came up loud and clear was that, elementary teachers is sort of inherent in their schedule. They're not free at the same time. There's only so many related arts teachers, which is how they navigate the prep periods for the teachers. So, they can't quite manage having, all the third grade teachers off at the same time to do this more in-depth curriculum work or instructional practice work. It's just much harder the way they run their schedule. And they're so connected to having that class that's sort of self-contained all day. They just don't have as many options as the high school does for common planning time. So that's why there's a really, really strong desire and need for the early releases for them to all be free, not be worried about where the kids are and who's where and why, and just be able to focus on the CIA work. So, this, I don't expect you, it's in your packet, but it's just sort of outlines the differences. So, we would be trying to put forward to the parents somewhat revised calendar if you're all supportive of it. or if there's any sort of tweaks you want me to make to.
I mean, that, the tweaks in that, I'm not qualified to get into. That, and if that's what the union, but I do think it's important that you have a plan. And again, I'm not the one that should tell details, to get this out to the teachers as soon as possible and explain the rationale. Because while
Yeah.
the union put it forth, they don't necessarily represent the entire
Right.
Good point.
teaching body.
Right.
The breadth of teachers.
Good point.
So it's another one of those school community conversation things. Getting
Yeah,
the information out.
Because if we get it out now versus waiting to the fall,
Oh,
That
yeah, no, it
won't
would
be-
definitely be, yeah, before they leave.
and explain some of the stuff. Again, no, I
Like
can't
we
do
have
that. I'm
to.
not supposed to tell you what to do. I'm just supposed to say, here's a recommendation.
Come on, everybody else tells me what to do. What's different about you?
Tell me where to get off.
Oh,
Oh, thanks.
So we're not having to make a motion on this,
We probably do.
or do we?
Because we had to
Yeah.
formally
Right.
approve.
We had to
I
approve
think
the
it would be welcome.
I would like to move that we approve the 2023-2024 calendar suggestions that were developed in response to issues raised during the contract negotiations.
Second.
Well put. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So moved.
Thank you so much.
Let's see, student representatives. I was having that conversation with somebody today.
Yeah, I just wanted to update the board on what I'm thinking. I don't have a written proposal, but what my thinking around this has been that we need to do something drastically different.
Yeah.
You know, we've worked all year to try to recruit a student representative like we have in the past. We haven't been able to do so. It's not to say that we'll give up on the way that, you know, we used to have a student sit on the dais with the rest of you every meeting. But what I'd like to do is run a course next year through the ILC. And the students that opt to take the course, their assignments will be around the information that you need to do your work. So what's going on in the schools? You know, what's the reports? What are issues they want you to consider or know about? And their reports, I mean, while they could be in person like they used to accommodate the students in the schedules, it might be a written report. It might be a short video, or whatever other creative way they can come up with to get the information across to all of you, which is really, I think, what you need. But we've been trying to do it the traditional way. The kids we usually get to participate are so busy with every other thing that they can do in the high school and the middle school, they can't always attend, and it falls apart there. So I'm trying to come up with a creative way to make sure you get the information you need, the community gets what they need, we get what we need, and it sort of meets the students' needs. So I think if the assignments in the course are based on, you know, what you want, then we'll get that information. If they can come, they're welcome to come. If they can't, it might be a written report, like I said, a video,
And some of those.
a couple of slides.
Some of the reports that students have given over the years have been off the chart, positive. You know, as far as, you know, they were almost thesis level, some of them. You know, you got,
Yeah. I mean, my course would be, you know, local government, community engagement. And that's what we'll focus on, is how you can contribute to your community. And I'm excited about it. Hopefully some kids will opt to take it.
Well, just speaking from what we've seen, you know, across the state, there is a lot of interest on the part of young adults in getting involved. So we just have to be smart enough to figure out how to help them do it.
That's what I'm trying to do.
You know, and I'm saying that candidly, it took us 6 years to get the youth council in place.
Mhm.
But now that it's in place, those kids are knocking it out of the park, you know?
Mm.
And they're from all over, right? They're all over the state. And so, you know, we know that energy and ability and capability is there. You know, I think it's just we as the adults need to kind of just like stop thinking in our weird boxes sometimes and go, this isn't working for them.
Exactly.
And it's not really working for us if it's not working for them.
Yeah.
So, you know, like, how do we make it? So, thanks. I'm glad you're thinking. in this.
Because I can't just not say anything.
Me either. I'm
I think
next.
that's
No,
a
I know
great
it's coming.
idea, but for example, this calendar change,
Mm.
if it's a class, it might be a useful exercise to get a student perspective on
Mm.
how that and some other things that directly affect
Mm.
school operations. That could be assignment where and there's a consensus. And I think I've said this before, and you may have said it, but I just clarify it. Would also be good if the board could give research projects to the students, because that way there may be background information on certain subjects like policy governance or something that would relate to the topic that it sounds like you're proposing, but we don't have necessarily the time to develop.
Mm. Well, and I mean, some of the larger items that the board contends with every year could be sort of the big topics of the course. So budget, calendar, you know, policy governance, community engagement,
Yeah.
equity, perhaps.
See, like I just said to Russ, it's a mirror image of what the youth council is doing now. And you figure, they're not even a year old yet,
I know.
but they've already taken requests for policy research. These are our kids.
Yeah.
You know, sixth grade, you know, through high school. And they've already started, you know, putting the word out that they're interested in doing that. So it's, go ahead.
I was just gonna say too, and when I've been talking to some of the other districts, that's what I have to do. I have to talk with them and see what they're doing to see how I can compare, not compare to be mean, but just compare to see if they're doing something that maybe would work for us. When they're talking about their youth representatives, some of them have done just that. They've gotten one or two and they've said, okay, I will be your advisor. That's all I'm here to do is to advise you. Sorry. You come to us and tell me, this is what you want to do, but they're given the freedom to bring that forth. And sometimes I think some of the kids in our past, the ones I've talked to anyway, and I've talked to 3 different ones, they didn't feel like they had that freedom to come and say what they felt needed to be said as the student representative to the board. And I think we had a couple of sessions on this last time at the conference, and they had some great suggestions and some real interesting conversations with how that they have been successful. And then their student reps have pulled in others that have brought the interest and formed their own little board and bringing it forth to their school board, then what they're doing and what they're doing even in the school. I was just amazed at what some of these kids are doing. And you're talking about the youth council, the same thing. Only they're doing there on a much larger scale. I'm excited to get student reps in it. I think that's an excellent idea, is to do a class like that so that they can really understand what's going on.
I've noticed that they have a lot to say. And I realize that we're not because of the time of our meetings and their hectic schedules, it's just not conducive to fit in. But every time I talk to students at the high school, I'm always impressed with how much they have to say, how articulate they are and how interested they are. And, you know, when I went to exhibition night, oh, I hope you're not thinking about cutting this. Some of them thought I was there because I wanted to somehow cut exhibition night or cut ILC. And it was like, no, it's actually the opposite of that. But, you know, each student was so articulate about the project they did, why the ILC was so important, how it met their needs, and, you know, how important that program is to their livelihood, their success. It was, you know, it was fascinating. So I started thinking that that's a conduit that we could use to do this, that we haven't sort of tapped.
Like it.
The first insight into how the independent system works and give you a different perspective to the program within the district. It's interesting. Great idea.
Cool. Thank you, Tom.
More to come on that.
Great. That's it. That's exciting.
It is.
That brings us to the board work plan.
All I did here is add in the things you mentioned at your last sort of business meeting. And continue to just sort of refine it, especially the linkage meetings, which are the engagement meetings. And then also trying to nail down the date for the retreat. I don't know if we've decided that it would be the 23rd of August or if it's going to be some other day, but it'd be nice to try to nail down the retreat date. And then Julie and I will work with Roy's replacement, Katie, around, you know, organizing all the topics. Because I know one of them is MTSS, which is the multi-tiered system of supports, and that includes all the changes within special ed law. There's probably a lot of other topics, but
And last time this issue came up, it specifically asked if we consider a time in late August. So clearly, this proposal would meet that requirement, so I'm in favor of this.
So the 21st of August,
23rd.
23rd.
usually at that time of the year, even though it's usually a regular meeting, we don't have a lot other than updates on what the beginning of the year was like. You know, it's technically before the teachers are even back. So we could update you on any work that we've done over the summer, just as part of the retreat. But as far as a regular formal meeting like this, there isn't always a lot of material for that. So a retreat would be a welcome.
I think we really need to have a goal for what we want to get out of that retreat. And it would be nice to be setting it early enough that getting a moderator in there or
Exactly.
something like that. And so that we, the board, can be thinking about that one or two goals at least, so that, and to set how we're going to accomplish that goal, or how we're going to determine that we've accomplished that goal.
And you have one more meeting
Yeah.
before the end of June.
Mhm.
But I want you to keep thinking about, like, if there is a topic, do I need to bring in a moderator that I might have to figure
Right.
out if they're available and, you know, find the topic like we've done in the past. So,
It's basically that's what we ended up doing anyways in June. Because-
Yeah, but it just seems like that it was like one or two people deciding what we were
No,
going
you
to do.
did
That's
that.
how I felt.
Oh,
That's just
well, it
not
was-
my feeling.
Okay, but it was a
Okay.
board activity.
Oh, I'm sure it was. I
No,
just
it
didn't get it. I'll admit it. I probably just didn't get it. And I'm thinking, oh, okay, well, this is what we're going to do.
No, because they had asked us collectively,
Mm-hmm.
what did we think? Because, you know, when you're bringing in professionals, be it if we were going to do more policy governance work, you know, we have to hire those folks. They're in such demand, you know, around the
Oh, yeah.
state that it's hard to get them booked, you know, that kind of thing, the facilitators. We're using the the organizational facility from the past, we would pick the topics, as a board, like, Russ was, instrumental in talking about from the community engagement perspective, how policy governance intersects with that. And so that was part of, us looking at the ends of it. So, because that's all part of it. So we do that.
I mean, I'm sure I was part of that conversation because I don't sit here quietly any longer. But my personal feelings was that there was just a couple of people that decided this is what we were going to do, and that's what we did. Which I have nothing. I mean, there was nothing wrong with what we've done because I've always got something out of it. I just didn't feel like it. For me, it wasn't a group effort.
So let's make sure
So
collectively that at our June meeting that we get consensus, that everybody feels comfortable
thank you.
about our direction for the retreat.
Thank you.
I think that's a fair way for us to.
I would appreciate that. Thank you very much.
As a board, collectively. Peter.
So, excuse me, there has been the suggestion that we talk about the multi-tiered system of supports, which, as I understand it, is a rather significant revision to what we need to do for our special needs students. And I suspect that you, Nancy, probably know more about that than any of us, given your involvement with the state school board association. Do you think that would be an appropriate topic?
I think it would be a very appropriate topic.
So
That's my personal opinion.
I am willing to be swayed by your opinion.
Oh, now you're gonna make me feel bad, aren't you?
No.
One of the things we did in the past that I think you all enjoyed was we did a survey.
Yeah.
We could do a survey of sort of the big topics
Mhm.
that might be relevant for the board, like MTSS. And just get your opinion. We don't have to do one topic, we probably could do a couple topics if we had an extended retreat. But I think last year or the year before, we did do a survey and just got your input on, who wanted to learn about what. I don't know if that's a good idea or if you'd rather just decide in this format, but I throw that out there.
What's fascinating when you think about just some of the topics. Depending on where we're at, as a board, district, where our team is heading in a particular direction. It's fascinating when you look at how some of these things recur. Because I think Tom would bear witness. This isn't the first time that MTSS has shown itself. I think that we have one of our elementary schools was one of the practicing experimental schools in that. Remember? Correct?
Yeah.
I think it was DBS that 5-6 years ago. That first evolution. So even MTSS has changed and progressed. So now we're at a new level of development within that time. So it's just fascinating. Sometimes things change. And, it's sure it's just part of the times.
I know another thing the board mentioned this year that they felt like they needed a little more information on was restorative practice.
Right.
We talk about that a lot with behavior, nowadays. And it'd be good for you to have an understanding of what that is and what some of the basic components are.
A topic which we might want to think about if you don't want to push forward, and I would support if you do, volunteer, is the fact that while we have not experienced it ourselves, there has been increasingly a attack upon school boards as people attempt to bring forward partisan issues. Our school board is not unique, but it is one of the school boards where we don't get voted in based on party affiliation. It's a very nonpartisan board. We are elected as individuals, not as representatives or people being nominated by Democrats, progressives, or whomever. There are other parts of the country where that is not true, and there are significant elements within our society who are attempting to push a specific social agenda or agendas, and we're very, very well funded, who have come in and basically attempted to use school board meetings as the place and forum in which to push those agendas. And if you are not prepared for such an eventuality, you're not likely to know how to respond appropriately. And as I said, it has not been an issue here. We're fortunate. I would hope that will continue. But that might be something that we might want to continue to consider as a possible subject matter.
Well, one of the things for a retreat is we have flexibility. It doesn't have to be just one topic. It can be a number of discussions that we have as a board. I think Peter's comment is no, it's accurate. Some of the stories, even in our own state, are scary. And I'll tell you, I can understand why some people have given up on work, because you can only fight certain forces so long. So we're fortunate to not, as Peter said, be in that situation.
But in that context, like Mothers for Liberty is the one in Florida. And they have a list of questions that you have to answer before they'll give you the support. And so I think, while protecting free speech, it is important for the board to understand and be able to recognize if that were to begin to happen here, type thing. So yeah, I think it doesn't have to be a long, but it could be a short snippet saying, here's some of the things they do or look for, just so, again, you're ready for a informed discourse.
Another thing that Doug's brought up that I think is really important is some sort of a new board member orientation.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't have to be a long item at a retreat, but it would be nice to sort of come up with an outline of what you all think are the key components of a new board member orientation. And then I'm happy to try to put together the contents, but it'd be nice to know from all of you experienced board members, like, what does that need to look like? And what should happen when? Budgeting, how to make a motion at a meeting, or, quorum, all the rules around open meeting policy. Something like that might be nice, and then we can try to solidify the idea of having our Hartford school board member orientation.
Another
I could probably
conversation.
piece together stuff from the SBA and other
I was going to
places.
say, another conversation we had today was that very thing, and talking about, what we've talked about before in the past is people that are going to run for the board, do they really know what they're running for?
And we've
What's
seen-
involved? We've talked about that, and we had a lengthy conversation about that very thing today at our meeting at the VSBA too. So there are other boards that are all thinking the same way that we're thinking about the orientation and letting people know beforehand, before they put their name on that ballot.
Because it is a citizen organization. Once we're floated in, and there's a lot going on. And, as you start doing the webinars and reading and even just watching, the meetings too, you start to see where those nuances come together.
In that context, some of the nuances would be really important. Like the concern about getting on any social media site in a discussion, or what happens if three of us are in the same room? What can be done? What can't be done? Type of thing. Just so that the clear understanding, I think, and that wouldn't take long. It's basically just describing what the issue is and how to address it.
We had the Secretary of State come to VSBA and talked about open meeting law, and what you can't do and what you can do, and telephone conversations and emails and the whole schmear. Which was very in depth.
Which would be a good one, but that should be for the community engagement.
I think it would be great.
Yeah.
And the thing is, Sarah just looked on the web, so that,
Yeah,
it
she's very nice.
would be an easy.
An easy ask. Yes.
So is the consensus around, a survey? I mean, the survey doesn't have to be so strict that you can't add in an item, like we could have a blank for other and you would, type in, but just to get some structure so I can begin to plan. You have one meeting left in June, but then, we have that break.
Right.
And we come back for the retreat. It'd be nice to solidify,
So based on the
what you all
conversation,
want.
so based
Maybe
on
the topics.
Well, based on our conversation so far, if we kind of start from there, and we'd be able to bring the results back, to the meeting, on, at the end of the month.
Yeah.
And, this is where you're at, five, four of you said, let's do this one first, and three said this, and
I'm
we
fine
need
with
5
that.
minutes of this.
Yeah, that would be great. All right, will do.
I'll say something later.
Yeah, in public, because we do have public comment. And we can do public comment. Okay, so we did the retreat date, EL7, asset protection revision.
I modified the report, and unfortunately, even though I pushed color on the machine, it didn't come out yellow. But it did come out in italics, and you can sort of see that it's got some shading. I think it's on page 5. I don't know if you want me to read that. If you're comfortable with what it says, I sent it over the weekend. If you want me to revise it, or if I completely missed the mark.
Well, my personal feeling would be, why don't we read it into the minutes? Because it is part of the revision. Well, it's almost like amending the minutes. And then we can make a motion to accept, because we've all had a chance to read it.
All right. So what I added in on 7.4, unnecessarily expose the organization, its board, or its staff to claims of liability. I added into the evidence that staff are trained annually in how to deal with hazing, harassment, and bullying situations between students. Despite this training and strict adherence to federal and state HHB, and parentheses, hazing, harassment, and bullying, policy and procedures, the district did incur a claim that resulted in an unbudgeted liability claim being incurred by the district. In order to prevent this type of incident from occurring again, the district is revising its practices to ensure more is done for the student or students who have been harassed or bullied. In the past, focus has been on the perpetrator of the incident and not necessarily those perpetrated against. Through recent events, the district administration realizes more must be done to alleviate the impact of harmful bullying and harassment. Remediation may include counseling, restorative work with all the parties involved, school board involvement with repeat offenders, legal action if applicable, alternative placements for students, and other, I got two others, other reasonable accommodation that students, parents, administrators, or staff identify as beneficial.
I guess I'll speak since I'm the one, and I find that I'm comfortable with that. Because, well, one is too many. It was only one, and we've taken the corrective action. And we've also acknowledged publicly that this happened, and we've done the right thing. So I'm comfortable with the revision and with the in compliance as well.
Me too.
I move that we approve the amended EL7 asset protection monitoring.
I'll second.
So we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. Thank you.
Thank you. Not perfect, but getting there. Thank you.
Board committee assignments and reports, updates.
I guess I can start. H. Corey, it occurred to me, why isn't, and I mean, I know we'd have to discuss, why isn't the equity coordinator one of the board representatives on that committee? I mean, it would enhance the committee's understanding of what's happening. They would be able to interact on some of the activities and give direction to that committee from the district. And since there's only 5 board members and numerous committees, that would also relieve the rest of you from another board, another committee assignment. I think that's because I don't think it has to be a board member. It just has to be a school official. I mean, I don't know. I'd have to look at that.
I think the language actually specified a member of our board.
I think it does say so.
Which is sad. Your point's well taken.
Yes.
Um,
And that it can be changed. We created the charter, we can amend the charter.
And I think it was specifically, yeah, it was
And I
specifically
do
2
think
school
that-
board, 2 select.
And I haven't brought it up to the committee, but I do think they would be agreeable to because that's some of the information they're clamoring for.
and the thing is, the other piece to that, our DEI coordinator is a professional doing that work every day. And so he or she, depending on the time, is a valuable resource to all of us doing this work. So it only makes sense. And hopefully when the town gets to that point and it starts doing its, deeper dive into some of the things that are on their list for work, and they assign or hire a person to direct that work on the town level, that person should also be, part of it. Because then there's the synergy with the 2 bodies as well, just like with the boards. So I think we should just.
One of the things all of us, the administrators left last night going, we need to be more involved with H. Corey. So, I committed and I went up to Sarah and told her, I want to talk with her more. So I'd like to be attending the H. Corey meetings. One of the issues with the equity coordinator, is right now they're in a teaching position. So requiring that might be a little problematic. I mean, it's not
Mhm.
something we couldn't ask, but it's also something that as we move to have an administrator, certainly something we could require. But in the meantime, Julie, Roy, and I were both like, we need to work with H. Corey more regularly and more, deeply.
And
So kind of along the same lines of like, why haven't we done that? Why haven't we, brought the district equity team and the H. Corey together more often?
I'm gonna make this. We've had this discussion, and maybe we need to have it a little more. That particular position happens to be, like you said, a teaching position at the moment. And should it be, is the question.
Yeah. No, we've already had the conversation with the new coordinator that, we're gonna create a pathway for her to move,
Well.
if the
that's
board
because-
accepts that. if the
Well,
board- yeah.
the board's already said, what the hell? Excuse me. I'm being very candid,
Right.
Because, and that's not to say that it being a teaching is a bad thing. It's just that the level of work that that individual provides for the whole district, he or she should be in a different class.
Right.
Well,
and we advertised it as, the equity coordinator or equity director.
Yeah.
And, as the committee did that work, we went into it hoping to find, a director. We ended up, the best candidate was someone who wants to be a coordinator, but is willing to work towards the administrative endorsement and a pathway to be the director. And I'm convinced we got the best candidate, but we,
And that was the role of the committee, was to try to ensure that. And hearing from you that the response from the candidate, newly assigned DEI
yeah,
person, is the willingness to grow the position.
Mhm.
And just like everything else we do in education, if we're not growing, we're back.
Yeah.
So,
and we certainly can invite and encourage, her to attend the H Corps meetings. I don't know, we can't require, but, we don't have to cross that bridge right now.
I'll modify my proposal because it went too far. I will say that I would encourage the administration figure out the appropriate representative. And I would also ask that the administration consider that the superintendent is only one person and doesn't necessarily have to do it all.
point well taken.
And I mean, because if it is a member of the administrative team, I'm guessing you guys talk.
A
And
little bit.
And then, if necessary, other members could be brought in to go into detail. So you work it out. That's my suggestion.
Good job. Okay, I sent to everyone, I sent the weekly report from the SBA, and that basically tells you everything we're doing right now, and including having long meetings. And then Hartford Community Coalition, I sent you the 2022. We just got our yearly annual report back. So I just sent that because it's much easier for you to sit there and look at that than me to go through all of this stuff. I will remind everyone that next Wednesday is the block party. Okay. And it'll be right over there. Right over there from 5 to 8
With lights.
with lights.
Can I just interject that as part of H Corey, I would like to remind people that on Sunday, I believe, is the
Oh,
Juneteenth
Yes, it is.
celebration
Yes, it
right
is.
there.
Yes, yes.
Saturday.
Saturday, okay.
Saturday. Okay.
Yeah, and I'm gonna announce that tomorrow to the whole district community through our, mass email system with the Juneteenth message, but that the celebration is Saturday.
And we're telling the kids and we're the high schoolers that are needing community service hours, that if they come and volunteer with HCC to help out with the block party, they do get time credits for that.
Well, I think any of those engagement,
Right.
pieces only makes sense, and especially if we're, let's say, co-collaborators, and it even makes it easy.
And we're starting the food program then too. And we always need volunteers for that.
You have a Cracker Jack coordinator.
We do have a Cracker Jack coordinator.
Okay, cool. So, Russ, we still need to meet with Jacob.
Yeah.
And get just a couple of cleanup things done.
And that needs to be done sooner rather than later.
And then we've been on target with signings. Just finished all the contracts, the big batch, teacher contracts, administrative contracts. So there was a few. So that's all done. Peter?
Policy committee, i.e. 3 of us met, and one of the things we had been planning on doing for a very long time was reviewing our policies to see that they actually are equitable in treating the different members of our community, i.e. we're taking into account issues around race, gender, et cetera, making sure that they will be as equitable as possible in all members of the community. And we figured out a process for getting that going.
We also, if I can add, that school safety law was passed.
Yes.
And we have to review and implement 2 policies.
By August
Yeah.
1st. So we will be meeting, yes.
Yeah,
We
we'll
haven't
be
done it
meeting.
yet.
But one is to do with access control, which thankfully we already have, but we'll look at that and make sure it complies with the new law. And the other is around emergency response drills. So,
But we will.
Yeah,
we
both
said that
good.
we'd talk about them. And it should be a fairly simple conversation because this again is one of those mandated language. We have very little ability to do much with it. Which sometimes it's a good thing and sometimes it's a real. Maybe.
Okay. Okay. Excited for our new DEI coordinator to come on board and get started. I'm gonna try to connect with her shortly. Actually, something. So we will do just to check what she needs for support from the board. So that brings us to public comments. No members in. Did we scare them away from last night?
I do have a public comment.
We do have a public who wants to make a public.
Exactly. I mean, as many of you know, I have sold my house and there will be a need for a replacement. I would like to suggest that maybe that be a topic or start the process for the 28th meeting so that the replacement person would be part of the discussion at the retreat, especially if it's going to be covering orientation. That would only seem to make some sense to me. And as I've stated before, I can resign at any point. Except, I mean, I have to resign as of July 16th. That's the quote unquote drop dead date.
So I would like to comment on that public comment. And say that it has been both in the honored term, a privilege and a pleasure to have worked with you all these many years. You first came on the board to cover for somebody else after they had stepped off the board, which having done that myself, I have to say is not a bad way to get on the board. And I have appreciated the enthusiasm, the candor, and the sense of justice that brought to your service. Growing up in the South, Texas, which sometimes is the South and sometimes isn't.
Sometimes not, yeah.
I think, and Nancy, I think you'll probably agree with me. One of the best compliments you can make about anybody is they're good folk.
That's right.
They're good people. And it has been a pleasure serving you because it's a pleasure being around good folk. And good people. So thank you.
You make me blush here.
You're blushing.
No close up.
I will echo those sentiments. Absolutely.
I think Peter couldn't have said it better.
Mhm.
You know, and I think that's what makes our work so special. You've made it possible to do that.
Absolutely.
And we thank you for that.
Appreciate all the nice words and you'll get your payment later.
Oh, good.
Maybe I gotta ride in the Volkswagen.
There you go. I'm driving it to graduation.
Oh. I have one public comment, please.
Yes.
I want to congratulate our boys lacrosse team. They are state champions for that. Are they districts, regions? What do they do? District 2? What's Division 2? Thank you. See, I don't know enough about that, but I do know that they won. And I want to publicly congratulate them on that. I think that's outstanding.
Cool. And I guess my public comment would be, I'm glad we were able to reconvene our joint meetings with the select board. I think as a result of that meeting last night, I'm hoping that we might start looking at doing more discussions together and not even thinking in terms of this grandiose joint meeting type of thing, but taking, topics that are mutual to both boards and the community as a whole, and continue to move that discussion. I know it was hard for some people in the community who are expecting more results from the discussion, but it had been 2 years since we had a joint meeting. So just, getting together was an event in itself. I think, we'll be able to look towards some specific outcomes at our next convening, and let's just keep moving in the positive direction. So that brings us through the public comment piece and the consent agenda.
Okay, we've got 2 sets of minutes and a couple appointments. Bailey Parker, high school social studies position, Allison Litton to high school French, Shannon Stacy to middle school math, Kara Hemingway to Ottaquiche School Counselor, and then one resignation, Jennifer Atwood from Dalton Brook School.
I don't make my usual motion, which is I move that we approve the consent agenda and extend our warm welcome to those who are joining our community and our thanks to those who are.
I'll second.
So we have a motion and a second to accept the consent agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. That brings us to, we will be meeting on the 28th. It is an engagement meeting. So we'll need to, put a thought to
The topic?
yeah.
Okay.
And let's see. We'll do whatever necessary business we need to get done to clean up the end of the year.
You
And
could throw a going away party for me.
We go.
well, that would be an engagement.
That would be a good, yeah.
Okay, but yeah, and I will work with Tom and Doug to come up with the appropriate topic for that meeting.
Cool. And let's see. There- This is a little out of order. But we will have a need for an executive session after the meeting evaluation. So we'll do the evaluation first.
One to go. At the end of the board meeting, each board member and the superintendent or an appointed evaluator for the meeting completes this monitoring form. The responses are shared and a discussion is held on the areas that need improvement. The chair collects the completed form to use in the board's monitoring reports. Board was prepared for the meeting, satisfactory. Board's time was spent on ends, not means, satisfactory, although one member kept trying to micromanage. Each board member was given an opportunity to participate, satisfactory. Board treated all persons with courtesy and fairness, satisfactory. Board adhered to Robert's Rules of Order as appropriate and necessary, satisfactory. Board adhered to its adopted governance style. It emphasized outward vision. It encouraged diversity in viewpoints. It exercised strategic leadership and not administrative detail. It maintained distinction between board and staff roles. It used collective decision-making. It looked to the future. Satisfactory.
Monson.
Pursuant to 1 VSA section 313A1 and 313A3, I move that we find that there is a need for an executive session to deal with a grievance and to deal with the evaluation of a public employee, and then we move into said executive session.
So we have a motion in a second to move into executive session based on that criteria. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So moved.
And we're taking